If you'd like to take a seat. I want to welcome you all today, coming here on a sort of an iffy day and also on Super Bowl Sunday. So thank you for being here. It's a very interesting subject for us because, as most of you know, I think, the Sudbury Historical Society is looking seriously at a new space for us because we very likely will be losing the space that we occupy upstairs on the second floor. And so what we'd love to do is to have a real museum that is totally accessible and we can show our collections in a meaningful way. So that's very exciting for us right now. And this particular talk by William Hosley was planned actually last summer when we really didn't realize that we were going to be looking so intensely for a new museum. And it just so happens that this is the talk for today. So I'm really thrilled about that. William Hosley, Bill, came all the way from Hartford to talk with us today. And I'll just read from something that he wrote. He says, "Our best community museums offer inspirational experiences, are uniquely evocative teaching tools, epitomize historic preservation, collect and preserve compelling aspects of the American experience, and are a refuge for local knowledge." I think that's a great description. And more about him, because I think he's going to be too modest to say this. He is a prolific scholar, writer, and public speaker, and one of the leading experts on New England art and history, having studied more than 750 museums and historic libraries. Bill has concluded that small is indeed beautiful.
What more needs to be said? Hey, it's great to be in Sudbury. Ruth didn't mention, but she knows I was formerly the curator at the Wadsworth Athenaeum, and our friend Dr. Nutting, as some of you know, Wallace Nutting from nearby Framingham, made off with the Sudbury communion table. This is like in 1920. And I think if you get your museum together, they'll probably lend it back to you. We had it on loan for years. It's absolutely a national treasure in the sense that it's a 17th century. It was, you know, there are 5 of them in the whole country. And this one was from Sudbury, but it was apparently either collecting dust or it wasn't being used. And the minister, probably right across the street here, sold it to Wallace Nutting in the 1920s. So it's been in Hartford since 1925. But can I get the lights out? Is that something I can do? Or? Okay, and yeah, that's all right. Just real briefly, just by way of introduction, I attended high school in a small Vermont town that, like most Vermont towns in 1970, hadn't experienced any growth in a century. Saxton's River reeked of antiquity and a sense of living history just beneath the surface. It changed my life and helped me realize that history isn't just in books, and it's not out there somewhere. It's close at hand and underfoot. These were places worth caring about, and in many ways, people have never cared more than now about the quality and character of their communities. However, history as an academic discipline, something we learn in school, is not doing so well. I'm going to start by these are a couple little short video clips, and then the rest of it will just be me talking about this stuff.
Children in America today were by and large historically illiterate. The teaching of history has become your hobby horse, correct? Historically illiterate.
I feel that very much so. I ran into some students on university camp, and I was just stunned by how much they didn't know. One came up to me after one of my talks and said that until she heard me speak that morning, she'd never understood that the original 13 colonies were on the East Coast. And I thought, what are we doing? that's so wrong, so pathetic. It's not their fault. It's our fault. And when I say our fault, I don't mean just the teachers. I mean the parents and grandparents. We have to take part. The stories around the family dinner table. I say bring back dinner if you want to improve how children get to know history. We need to seriously revamp the teaching of the teachers. I don't feel that any professional teacher should major in education. They should major in a subject. Best teachers are those who have the gift and the energy and the enthusiasm to convey their love for science, or history, or Shakespeare, or whatever it is. Show them what you love, is the old adage. And we've all had them, where they can change your life. They can electrify the morning.
We turn now to education and a brand new report about a glaring failure in teaching American children. More than 50 years after Sam Cooke sang that song, Don't Know Much About History, we learned today that only 12% of U.S. high school seniors are proficient in the legacy of America's past.
Stunning. The overwhelming majority of American students ignorant about some basic facts about American history.
It's our patriotic duty to head over to Universal Studios and ask people questions about America.
Did we fight the Revolutionary War?
Oh my gosh, I don't know this stuff. I really don't know this stuff.
Really? I believe you.
Yeah.
Oh, what are you studying?
Elementary education.
Oh, you're going to be a teacher?
Yeah.
What happened on the 4th of July?
The 4th of July. In what year? Which year are you talking about?
Who are those two people? Huh?
From the Love Boat? Yeah.
Their names are Ike and Dick.
Turner?
Who won the Alamo?
David Crockett.
Who won the Alamo?
Come on, I just...
Who won at the Alamo?
We did.
We did. Oh, that would be wrong.
Okay. Those are just some clips. There's a lot more where that came from, but it gives you a little background context. Here is the world that was America back in the 50s and 60s. We're going to go through a little bit of a sort of an arc of how we got to this point of historical illiteracy and detachment from these stories that make America what it is. And I am 57 years old, and so I remember vividly as a little kid the centennial of the Civil War. And in the early 60s, that was a big deal. And you know, in 1963, our family did what a lot of families did in those days. You'd get in a station wagon and you'd go off on a trip and you'd explore interesting historic places. We went to Gettysburg, in the city that I lived in at the time, Rochester, New York. This was Washington Square, but a Civil War monument with Abraham Lincoln crowning it. And these were the kind of part of the sort of public pageantry that made places and brought history, in a sense, to life for young people and for in the popular culture. At the age of 10, in about 1965, I remember going to Sturbridge Village for the first time. And Sturbridge Village was magic then, and it's magic now. And I think these institutions have so much to teach us and so much inspiration at the heart of them. My grandmother, as it turned out, lived in Boston, actually in Newton, and right on the MTA line. And I remember at the age of 10, I went, and this is also in the early 60s, when it was still pretty much brand new, walked the Freedom Trail. And I just thought my head was going to explode. It was so exciting to be in Boston and to go to Bunker Hill and to see Paul Revere's house. I was a little kid, impressionable. But the culture had prepared me and our generation at that point to care about these things and to be interested in them. We came out here to Lexington and Concord, and these are iconic experiences. There isn't a state in the Union that doesn't have something inspirational to teach. Most towns do, but obviously this area has more than most, and it is amazing, amazing stuff that makes all the difference. Going down to Plymouth and to see Pilgrim Hall, oldest museum in its original building in the United States, and to see Peregrine White's cradle that was, the first, I guess, European white child born in the New World, and the Winslow Bible and these things. It was kind of it expanded my sense of place and national pride. How many of you have seen the Forefathers Monument in Plymouth? It's a little off. People go there and don't always see it because it's sort of on a side street. This was the largest public sculpture in America prior to the Statue of Liberty. And it is still an amazing thing. My wife here, a couple of years ago, we were tourists in Plymouth. We did a day trip to Plymouth, which we do sometimes. And the museums weren't open yet, so we got there from Connecticut about 8 in the morning, or 8:30. And we said, well, let's go see the Forefathers Monument. And here already at 8:30 in the morning was a bus trip. 50 people, and this guy dressed as a pilgrim there, giving a lecture about it. And I thought, boy, this is amazing. What a wonderful teaching tool this is. Also in those days, we would subscribe to Yankee Magazine. There are lots of things one can learn. But again, the point here is that the popular culture was reinforcing engagement with history. You look at these covers, and what they illustrate in the 50s and early 60s are places that are historic architecture, historic vignettes, and in some cases sort of historic imagination. And again, you look at whether it's Norman Rockwell or other magazines, the art of the time, a cover story in Life magazine on the title of Thanksgiving with a New England meeting house on the cover. And it's interesting. Some years ago, I had a good friend who collected road maps, and they're fascinating. The road maps, just like the commemorative stamps, if you look at what we put on our stamps all through the time, it's a really interesting barometer of what Americans are thinking about and what they value. And these were road maps from the I would say, late 50s, and one in the middle is early 51. And again, that sense that history was the essence of the popular culture and that reverence for historic places. And again, this is, I just ordered this. I got the picture off the internet, but I actually want to read the book. The Golden Age of American Family Vacation. Somebody's actually written a book about that. And CUSA, I learned as I was preparing this, Chevrolet put a lot of money behind a big ad campaign that in the early, I think it started actually in 1950. So all through the 50s, there was this promotional initiative, this reinforcement that getting out and connecting to these historic places, sure, they wanted people to use cars, and oil companies wanted people to buy gasoline, but the best way they could think of promoting that was to discover our great American history. Schools typically bore the names of patriotic personalities. So again, this is the popular culture reinforcing the importance of history. This is the Nathan Hale School in New Haven, Connecticut. I shouldn't bring this up, but it's 30 years ago today, Karen Carpenter of the group The Carpenters actually died. And I just happened to just know that. This is where she went to school as a kid. And I'm sure that she looked up, who knows what she thought of those murals, but they were these WPA-era murals from the 1930s that told the story of Nathan Hale, who was a Connecticut patriot, Nathan Hale School. And in Connecticut, I'm very proud, our Connecticut State Capitol is one of the most auspicious buildings in America. It's so amazing. And it's sort of high modern Gothic from the 1870s, but it is encrusted with evidence of history and reverence for the past, and there are something like 60 statues and sculptures and statuary, and then all these little bas-relief panels that tell stories. And again, this is how the popular culture reinforced a reverence for American history and that sense of national pride. And then you had these things we used to call heroes. Where have all the heroes gone? Another reason history matters is that it furnishes models of moral courage, people who did the right thing when it wasn't easy, and they had nothing to gain by it. We call on our soldiers to do this every day, but it is a quality needed as much in politics, in the workplace, and in regular social interaction. Despite that, since the Cultural Revolution of the 1960s, armies of Hollywood writers, university professors, and cultural commentators have delighted in undermining the very idea of heroism, present or past. And I guess to that I say, enough is enough. And again, these are some of the icons of national pride: Mount Rushmore, the Statue of Liberty, and Ulysses Grant and Grant's tomb. Artists were involved in this kind of sense. Our artists celebrate national exceptionalism and the idea that our landscape revealed the divinity of nature and America as a chosen land. These are some pictures by the famous Hudson River School artists. Thomas Cole's view of the Oxbow in Northampton on the left, Yosemite on the lower right, and East Rock in New Haven, Connecticut by Frederick Church on the upper right. Our sculptors also celebrated that sense of history. I didn't get a chance to look closely enough to see who did your Revolutionary War statue across the street but I'm sure it was some sculptor, and you probably know who it was. But there are a lot of these public sculptures that, again, celebrated these great stories. Robert Gould Shaw in the 54th Regiment in Boston. It's a little detail from it in the lower left. William Tecumseh Sherman on the right. That is Augustus St. Gaudens, a portrait of him on the upper right, and the Puritan from Springfield, also by St. Gaudens. Calvin Coolidge may not deserve a place in the Presidential Hall of Fame, but when he retired from the presidency, he became the president of the Board of Trustees of the American Antiquarian Society. Eisenhower, who retired to the battlefield at Gettysburg so he could commune every day with the spirits of an epic past, has a single major political figure, corporate chieftain, or celebrity had much to say or done much to sustain, teach, and inspire about our history in the past 40, 50 years? There are a few exceptions, but they are too few, and they aren't well known enough, and American values aren't a fashion accessory. They require work that is sometimes unpleasant. And it wasn't just the Republicans, also the Democrats. Franklin Roosevelt was responsible. He loved history and launched the greatest historical art project in our history, the Federal Art Project, that produced hundreds of narrative murals for schools, courthouses, post offices, and this one in his own town of Hyde Park, New York. And it's pretty exciting. Has anybody been to FDR's house in Hyde Park? If you ever get back, or if you haven't been and go, don't miss the post office. It's one of the best. Of course, the Culinary Institute is probably the best thing. About as good a lunch or dinner as you could ever have right in town. So Hyde Park's a pretty cool destination. But the library is as interesting as anything in town, and you can see not the library, the post office. And FDR actually laid the cornerstone for it. Credit the women who jump-started all this. The colonial dames, the Daughters of the American Revolution, going back to the 1890s, women's groups and women's organizations that gave birth to historic preservation in America. They invented the concept of the House Museum, and women have played a disproportionate role every step in the way of instilling reverence and values and an appreciation for history in our culture. And I think that needs to be said over and over again. The legacy of achievement with these women's groups is astonishing. But it wasn't just them. The Bill Gateses and Warren Buffetts of the world, 60 years ago, John D. Rockefeller founded Colonial Williamsburg. This was not like a hobby. This was a mission. He had plenty of money, and what an extraordinary legacy it is to go to Williamsburg and to tap into these amazing stories. They do such a brilliant job of presenting them. And look, here we are in Sudbury. There he is, Henry Ford, and he didn't leave well enough alone too many places. There are other places. Belchertown, Massachusetts has a little facility that he underwrote the cost of. He almost wound up buying Wallace Nutting's collection and taking it out. Of course, the flagship of his interest in history was Dearborn Village and the Henry Ford Museum, but this is where he kind of dipped his toe in the water, right here. And the Wayside Inn is an extraordinary thing. Again, this period, 1950s and 40s and 50s, gave birth to a lot of these historic villages, places like historic Deerfield, Hancock Shaker Village, Sturbridge on the left, Williamsburg in the center, Cooperstown on the right. And the antiques world, I mean, I love antiques. I was a curator of decorative arts. But antiques at some point, I guess in the 1980s, became kind of, again, fashion accessories and things that were very expensive. And that sense of their importance as historical artifacts, things that teach us and inspire us about the reverence. You know, it became more about like art and lines and design, when for this generation, generations before, it was all about historical, or largely about historical associations. So that's it. This is the goal, is that we love America, and we want to understand why it needs to be loved and how to love it. And so we continue on into the next chapter. This is when sort of the music, I won't say the music died, but things got different. And I remember this vividly. Who doesn't? The day John F. Kennedy was assassinated. It's kind of a shocking shock to the system. You think, this is America. We, pushed back oppression and tyranny in World War II. These things don't happen here. Of course, they had happened with McKinley and a few others, obviously Abraham Lincoln. But it was shocking. And I would say 1963, it was just on the arc of a kind of transformation. Some of which has been very good, and some of which I think has been problematic. And certainly losing Martin Luther King was part of that. Okay, so we begin, there's a little chink in the armor, and we begin to think, okay, what are our values? Who are we as a people? And right about the time that Kennedy was assassinated, civil rights was really moving to the forefront. And there's no question that the stain of slavery and Jim Crow rears its head with undeniable force with civil rights, a movement both inspiring and demoralizing and kind of hard to face. And I think the fact that we've done it, I'll get back to that, have faced it and dealt with it in many compelling ways is inspirational and something to be very proud of. But these were not easy moments. And Vietnam ramped up. These were not easy moments. I mean, as I understand it, the Mexican War, although the country was about 1/20th the size, the Mexican War was almost as controversial as Vietnam. But Vietnam is one of these wars where the legacy, it's just never settles down. People have, and even this week or next week, the question will be, as they're confirming Richard Hagel, if they will, for Secretary of State, what did you think during the war? John Kerry, served his country, but then had issues with it. I mean, these are complicated things, and all I can say is that they began to chip away at that kind of monolithic sense of America that is, kind of unimpeachable in its integrity and values. Then there was the whole sort of hippie, drug, sexual revolution, all that activity in the 60s that, again, just it eroded the kind of sense of traditional patriotism and values. And I'm not, these are things both positive and negative. I would say that in terms of the feminist revolution, this was arguably the single most transformational movement of our times. Women's liberation, or whatever, however you want to label it, so profound and so complete we almost don't notice. But anyone who remembers the 50s or 60s, it has to be almost dazzled by the transformation of opportunities for women. And this is absolutely a good thing. Now we are dealing, one might argue, I won't say it's the last frontier because you never know, but the gay liberation, isn't that great? That is a hooked rug. It's at the Shelburne Museum in Vermont, and you must admit, it's special. But gay rights is kind of the new frontier of civil rights. And these are, again, how we grapple with diversity and inclusiveness and how we make, America better. Okay, so all these incredible things are swirling around in the culture. And then Nixon, Watergate, ugh. These aren't pleasant things. And I remember I was a senior in high school, and I was kind of horrified, actually, because I remember I had a great English teacher, but he was, he just loved, and we spent too much time during English class talking about Watergate, which was unfolding on television every day, so it's pretty hard to avoid. But there were people who just loved seeing this guy get taken down. And there is something kind of special about our democracy that we were able to do that. On the other hand, who was happier to watch a presidency collapse like that? It was grim, and it left an aftermath of that still, I think we're still dealing with. Other things going on at the period, Earth Day and environmentalism, both inspiring and demoralizing. With each stage of the Cultural Revolution, something is gained, but often at the cost of exposing a demon force or enemy, in this case, the vaunted corporate polluters. So, you know, this is the things we're learning. Then, in the middle of the 70s, I was in college at this point, the bicentennial, and a perplexing time to celebrate America, I must say. There was an attempted bombing, some of you probably remember this, of the Minuteman statue in 1973. I actually attended, I came down, I was living in Vermont, I attended the People's Bicentennial event in Concord on April 19th, 1975. It was an alternative to the official government-sanctioned commemoration where President Ford appeared. 30,000 of what the Boston Globe described as angry patriots. Arlo Guthrie, Pete Seeger, a North Vietnamese, was invited on stage and celebrated. A North Vietnamese officer from the army, celebrated as the real patriots, Cesar Chavez. This was all happening in Concord. The next day, there was a heckling of President Ford. It wasn't the most comfortable launch. And yet, despite the tacky commercialism of the bicentennial, the bicentennial did, in fact, raise historical consciousness and national pride. How could it not? The founding fathers and the story of our national origins are, by and large, inspirational. It would take a decade or so before academics began to debunk myths, expose flaws, and dwell on imperfections. The other thing going on at this time, the 70s, the preservation movement, so-called, never had more support or better decade than the 1970s. Its influence and values have been enduring. Alas, within the academy, history became increasingly strident, theoretical, esoteric, and angry, as the politics of race, class, and gender eclipsed the study of dead white males. In another time, the estimable Gordon Wood, shown here, would have epitomized the best practice in history, an illustrious graduate of Harvard, longtime professor at Brown University, but he became kind of the butt of ridicule amongst the more politically correct, progressive wing of the history profession. So even these things became contentious and difficult, and books like this come out. You know, this is the point here, is don't believe anything they say. And, you know, again, revisionism has its value. The question in my mind is balance and how far the pendulum swings. Personally, I think one of the most exciting things that has happened in history in our lifetime has to do with African Americans. At the same time, greater tolerance and diversity has yielded real fruit. African Americans have made some of the most compelling arguments for the power and usefulness of historical consciousness. John Hope Franklin, Alex Haley, and Malcolm X used history as a springboard for advocacy and civil rights. Malcolm X, his constant message was black pride, self-respect, and awareness of one's heritage. He developed a profound love for black history, and he integrated into many of his lectures insights taken from the heritage of African Americans and the African people. Lewis Henry Gates at Harvard, his explorations of African American genealogy and DNA analysis is just riveting television. I mean, that show is great. If you've not seen that, it's definitely worth reading. There's been so much really imaginative, I would say some of the most exciting scholarship in the history field of the past 30 years has involved African American history. Eddie McLeod, a writer, argues that black history is not only important, but essential to the survival of our people. Once we, speaking to other African Americans here, embrace the teachings and follow the examples of men and women like Dr. King, Dorothy Height, George Washington Carver and others, we will feel better about ourselves. When people feel good about themselves, they feel good about the people around them. They are less They are then less prone to mistreat one another through violence and other acts of destruction. Sort of duh. I mean, I think that's the way it is. Celebrating difference from melting pot to mosaic, the empowerment of diversity through affirmation of cultural heritage has been another very positive step. Identity quest, this new obsession with genealogy, the revival of the Yiddish language, study, Celtic dance. Christine and I, my wife, we were up in Nova Scotia and this past summer, and there's this incredible college of Gaelic studies where people are really bringing back to life not only the language, the music, and the folklore. I mean, it's a really fascinating development, and this is what we're talking about here is hardly unique to the United States, but no country really, in a sense, needs it more because, well, we'll get to that. Anyway, these are some other aspects of how popular culture in the 70s began to affirm the importance of preserving not just the melting pot, but the mosaic. The melting pot is everybody moves to America and becomes homogenous. The mosaic is we can keep our differences, but the challenge is restoring that sense of connectivity and national pride. Ellis Island, I hope some of you have been there. Huge success. Ellis Island is essentially more now than even maybe Bunker Hill, a touchstone to our national narrative. There are museums. We were talking about New Haven, probably the best, certainly the richest museum of Catholic history that I'm aware of in this country is the Knights of Columbus Museum in New Haven. And women's rights, women's history. The Women's Rights National Historic Park in Seneca Falls is an astonishing experience. Okay, but so we're now moving into the 80s, and what's happening here? Alas, the doubling down on diversity, which was, I think, a good thing, coincided with an erosion of civic values and the withdrawal of corporate leaders from the public sphere. Homogenization hasn't helped, with the traditional community-based commerce and retail giving way to national chains situated in places accessible only by car. We have these landscapes that nobody cares about, and I think they don't pull us together. We're talking before I got up here talking with just informally about how this center right here, this extraordinary municipal center that you have in Sudbury. You look out there, it's the town hall, the Grange, the churches, the burying ground, symbols of patriotism. These are spaces you can't forget, spaces that people care about, and spaces that call us to something aspirational. I think they're irreplaceably valuable. Right. All right, consumerism as a way of life and a cultural value. We live in a world where educated, affluent professionals are more likely to have taken a cruise up the Danube or visited China than to know and experience the treasures in their own backyards. And this whole kind of emphasis on shopping and money and material things, a little of that goes a long way. It's always been with us. But again, these are pendulum swings. Celebrityism. Celebrityism versus neighborliness. Celebrities dominate our culture like never before. Can you think of one that has anything interesting to say about citizenship, our cultural heritage, or the arts? Where are the foundations and political leaders championing the values, ideals, and civic responsibilities that make this country an engine of prosperity and a beacon of freedom? In the art, contemporary art, not all of it, but a lot of it satirizes or violates traditional norms of civil restraint. Wendell Berry, the poet, writes, "Our public art now communicates prejudice against old people, history, parental authority, religious faith, sexual discipline, manual work, rural people, and rural life, or anything local or small or inexpensive." It glamorizes and glorifies promiscuity, violence, and blasphemy. Well, now, he's a poet. He can say what he wants. But you do see these things. That was Serrano's, the famous sculpture where he put the crucifix in a jar of urine and called it art. This, at the Oakland Museum, not Oakland, it's Sacramento Museum, upper left, is, we used to do these reverential portraits of our presidents. This is George Bush, made out of little skulls and crossbones and dice. And, Michael Jackson. It's a parody. This is it. I mean, it's not all of it, but it's some of what we see. And so here we are, polarized factions talking past each other, a government that has filibusters and doesn't ever compromise, both sides, the decline of civil discourse, win at all costs, take no prisoners. Again, when is enough enough? The key is to find that love again. And this is Wendell Berry. I mentioned him. Wendell Berry writes about a community says that a community exercises its power by teaching its young and by preserving stories. He also says, it's probably the wrong thing to say on Super Bowl Sunday, but when else in history would you find an educated people who know more about sports than about the history of their country? Then he writes, and I love this, and this is Sudbury in a nutshell, right where we are. The old town centers were built by people, I love this line, the old town centers were built by people who were proud of their place and who realized a particular value in living there. The old buildings look good because they were built by people who respected themselves and wanted the respect of their neighbors. He then continues, if we are to protect this multitude of places, then we must know them imaginatively, with affection, and by heart. Robert Putnam from Harvard, his famous book now, Bowling Alone, we'll see a picture of it in a moment, and Richard Dreyfuss, the actor, he was in Jaws, you probably remember Jaws, he's been in a lot of movies. These are two people who are doing something, make a difference, in my opinion. Robert Putnam talks about the striking evidence that the vibrancy of American civil society has declined over the past several decades, an erosion of social capital, and the need to reinstill civic engagement, a need to explore creatively how public policy impinges on social capital, the formation of social capital. He notes that in 1958, one of his inspirations, part of his research, was that an anthropologist named Edward Banfield published a study of underdevelopment in a village in the southern tip of Italy, and concluded that the extreme poverty and backwardness is explained largely by the inability of villagers to act together for their common good. The X factor that explains economic development, according to Putnam, and I agree, is civic virtue. Richard Dreyfuss, on the other hand, is a celebrity that loves his country and is doing something worthwhile to make it better. The Dreyfuss Initiative exists. Their mission is to teach our kids how to run our country with common sense and realism before it's time for them to run the country. If we don't, someone else will run this country, nation, and the experiment of government by, for, and of the people will have failed. So, there are, I think, these counter trends that are evolving. One of my favorites being what I call the sense of place movement. And Lucy Lepard's one of my favorite books, The Lure of the Local, Senses of Place in a Multi-Centered Society. And her argument, and we're getting there about why what you're doing here matters, is that the key to making all that mosaic work is groundedness in place. It's not big national abstractions. It's small. It's starting at the community level and creating mechanisms that engage people, that give them that sense of civic attachment. And that can be done in 1,001 ways. The book on the art of placemaking on the right talks about the roles of public art and public spaces in fostering that. Yeah, and again, the relocalizing. They talk about the locavore movement and foodways, people locally grown food, and that's kind of a cool thing now. People like to have fresh fruit and vegetables and support the revitalization of local agriculture. I think the local food movement, the locavore movement, is the lead edge of something that's going to go much bigger, and that sense of relocalizing is going to be profound, and organizations, historical societies, community-based organizations like this have an indispensable role to play in it. Just again, there's a foundation up in Vermont called the Orton Foundation that has this, they call this Heart and Soul Projects, where they go into communities and work with communities to sort of find those mechanisms and social mechanisms that create social capital. There's going to, I hope, be more money and more resources available for projects that reinforce and instill that sense of civic pride and at the local level. Oh, here we go. I keep showing this. Love America. What role do community-based historical societies have to play? Well, let me...
Despite AASL
I don't want that.
Trust Conference's account, too many house museums with too much of...
I don't know why that was in there. Anyway, yeah, I could listen to myself. We don't want to do that. This is the weirdest thing in my 35 years in this business. A group of, a super exclusive group with a grant from the Rockefeller brothers met on Mount Olympus a couple of years ago, and they were representatives from the richest historical museums in the country, and they decided that the little guys don't matter, and that if you've got a house museum and it's not working, let's just put it back, make it a bed and breakfast, and give up. And that's what started me down this path. I was so upset about it. It was so ironic, and so I believe that they basically drafted what I called a Dr. Kevorkian manual for euthanizing house museums. And their argument is that there are too many house museums. Well, there are too many, but there are not enough great ones, and there are so many with huge untapped potential that the real assignment before us is to capitalize on that potential. In the introduction, it was mentioned, Christine and I probably have now actually been to 1,000 museums, and I'm just like a fanatic. I mean, anywhere we go, I was just noticing that the Grout Heald House in Wayland, is that it? I've never been there. Oh my. So that'll be on our summer shopping list, because there are a lot of things we haven't seen, but the list is getting shorter, and I've never been in a house museum that didn't have something, or a historical society that I didn't have something I'd never seen before, something that engaged me. And I'm a real student of these things, and they're great. So many of them are great. Some of them aren't so great, but the potential is there. And for people that complain that nobody cares about house museums, go to Charleston, South Carolina, and watch people. That is a picture on the left there of a house museum 15 minutes before the doors opened for the first tour off season. The 9 a.m. tour had not left yet. We were queued up. And I said, this is amazing. And all day long, they just churned. And this was off season. And the national parks do a gangbuster business. And frankly, if you're in Concord on a busy weekend, they do a gangbuster business. Some of the experts haven't gotten the memo yet. Their mantra about too many house museums bothers me, not because it is wrong, but because it is incomplete. Half of America's cultural patrimony is held by small historical organizations, the best of which provide the most extraordinary learning experiences in museumdom, while epitomizing historic preservation. Community-based historical organizations and house museums have the potential to be beacons of civic attachment, places for community learning and inspiration, preservation, and civic pride, a way to bring history and community back into the lives and consciousness of children and families. This is why state and local history are the most important of all. Our communities provide a readily comprehensible microcosm of the United States to teach how the nation was formed, grew, suffered, and prospered. How much more vividly the lessons of our history come alive when related to people and places within easy access. The sense of immediacy is of inestimable value in bringing home the lessons of the past and the continuing relevance of history at all levels. And as I say, Charleston, Philadelphia, Concord, Mass, on a busy weekend, you visit our parks, but also visit places in small communities that may not be destinations, but often will surprise you with the quality of what they have. There is almost no pattern to where you can find excellence, though money does often help. And I'm going to take you on a little tour of some of my favorite places and favorite things. I don't think anybody's been here, but you never know. This is the Orleans County Historical Society in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, the most remote part of the smallest state in New England. This is a national treasure that does superb work and has astonishing stuff to show and tell, done on a shoestring, a catalyst and expression of community engagement at the highest level. And they have, it's great, this is a county, because it's poor up there. Every town does not have a historical society. So imagine this, they cooperate. They all get together, and they created this thing together, and each town has a room in the museum, and there's this wonderful sort of competitive dynamic in which every year, the seasonal, they open in May, they close in October, and you know, they kind of, through the winter, they're kind of looking at what else can we add to our room so that we can be better than the town next door. So they've got all these great things, and there are all these thematic galleries, and this museum, this may seem like a kind of classical hodgepodge, but my God, one of these days, one of my goals in life, I don't know if I'll ever get there, is to mount an exhibit on treasures from small museums. The things I have found in little places are dazzling. This place, the Swift River Valley Historical Society, Quabbin Towns, is awe-inspiring. It is off the charts. Everything about it is to be loved. A kind of memorial to the Quabbin Towns taken by eminent domain in the 1920s, wiped out and flooded. The museum is bursting with emotional resonance and run by a network of volunteers you have to experience to believe. I have never seen more passion and community spirit. This small museum literally keeps the memory of Fall 5 Massachusetts towns alive. At the other end of the spectrum, the Mattituck Museum in Waterbury, Connecticut, has this state-of-the-art exhibition, interactive exhibit. It cost over $1 million to create, and it looks like it. But it's called Coming Home, Building Community in a Changing World. I described it in a review I wrote as a machine for manufacturing citizenship. Fabulous use of artifacts, fabulous use of interactives, fabulous use of film and oral history, and with enormous aspirations, a riveting and magnificent achievement in Waterbury, Connecticut. Drayton Hall, down in South Carolina, architectural grandeur and path-breaking interpretation. If you told me it was possible for a house museum utterly devoid of furnishings, there's nothing inside, just the architecture, to provide a riveting visitor experience, I might have not believed it. It's all about stories, storytelling, and again, in this case, the architectural grandeur, which this plantation house has in spades, and you can see some details. And again, the docent that took us around, you know, I would have listened to her talk about anything. I mean, she was impeccably trained, a great communicator, an engaging person to be with, made all the difference. Back up in Vermont, sometimes communities have specialty museums that leverage their local stories in a bigger way. This is the American Precision Museum in Windsor, Vermont. Is both a local history story and a thematic treasure trove with collections and storylines that extend beyond its locale, one of the best industrial history museums in the country. In Kansas City, the archaeology of the long-submerged Mississippi River steamboat Arabia has become one of the most popular attractions in the Midwest, a perfect time capsule of material culture and the antebellum South. Some museums have done exhibits. This was the Commerce and Culture exhibit at the Lyman Allen Museum in New London that took a street in New London and sort of deconstructed it, analyzed it spatially, historically. And it was a student project at Connecticut College, and it was history is handmaiden to civic planning and civic awareness. It was great. Mount Holyoke College has a wonderful art museum. Some of you may have seen it. This was a great exhibit they did there a few years ago on the Quabbin. And again, it was using art, photographs, and artifacts to look at a contemporary human concern involving, you know, sustainability and water use and land use, and, you know, incorporated all kinds of things. It was just a great exhibit that, again, grappled with the local in that setting. Christy and we live in the town of Enfield, Connecticut, which had three things that it's sort of big stories. And actually one of them is not too far from here, because Clinton, the town of Clinton, Massachusetts, was, I think they were one company at one point, the Bigelow Carpet Works and the manufacturing of carpets. So Enfield and Clinton were carpet manufacturing centers. We also were big in tobacco, and we had actually gunpowder that they made, and there was a Shaker village there. So there's a lot of history. And these are things the kids aren't learning in school and might not even know happened. My favorite house museums are time capsules, these multi-generational, where they weren't created, they're not restorations, they weren't created by curators. They're the stuff that families accumulate over 3 and sometimes 4 generations that are like archaeological sites. And the opportunity for interpretation with something like this is enormous. They're rare, very rare, but they're extraordinary. This is Rokeby up in North Ferrisburgh, Vermont. And I won't, because we're running out of time, go into all the storylines, but you could spend hours with a good interpreter learning about this. I've recently done a project in Plainfield, Massachusetts on this house. This is the Shaw Hudson House in Plainfield, west of Deerfield and Shelburne Falls area. Time capsule within a time capsule, a portal into community life, multi-generational family dynamics, city life, country life, and then this incredible, this is the most intact doctor's office in America. There's just nothing like it. I mean, this is basically when Dr. Shaw died, retired in 1854, they just locked the door and threw away the key. All they've done to this room in 150 years is dust. If you want to know what the now gigantic medical industry, what it was like, how it was practiced, the documentation, just incredible. And then it's people like yourselves that care about this stuff, not always professionals, often volunteers, but the things that I see, that sense of passion, the commitment that people have, their communities, and the way they preserve and present these stories, the support that these people, the people that do this kind of stuff, the communities that are doing it, that, you know, we spent $1.3 trillion fighting wars in Iraq. Every time the Challenger space shuttle went up, it was $450 million. They spent $1 trillion looking for water on Mars. I don't know why this stuff isn't as important. Help me understand. Storytellers, theater, reenactments, the things that are going on in the realm of public history are extraordinary. There's so much, content, so much that one can learn. And again, back to the Daughters of the American Revolution, the Colonial Dames, they're still at it. I think one of my favorite magazines in the country is DAR's American Spirit magazine, which covers so many different interesting aspects of history. And one of the best things they do is every issue they profile a teacher somewhere in America, I don't know how they find them, who is doing something lively and compelling with local history. So it's good stuff. Historic preservation continues to percolate and evolve and engage people. The reenactor scene is extraordinary. There are now probably 50 to 100,000 people in this country today whose hobby is reenacting history. And these are people who they may not have PhDs, but they are scholarly, and they bring this stuff to life, and it has a huge public following. Then, of course, there are our veterans and that whole process of remembering, whether it's Memorial Day or the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. These are ways that we remember. And it's not just our soldiers, it's things like the Holocaust, Oklahoma City, 9/11, the quality of public memory and the commemoration of public memory is stronger than ever. School groups and engaging kids. If I had a magic wand, the one thing I would do that I would think would have the greatest influence would be to provide resources, direction, and an impetus for schools to pull this stuff in. And whether it's visiting the museums or paying these historical organizations to develop content that they can now teleport in via the internet, we can make that dynamic happen. But it takes effort, and you have to have that desire to do it. And again, what I see with kids, it's inspirational. Adult public programming, hard to do well. I've done a lot of it. I love doing it. I obviously enjoy speaking, but some of the programs when I was in New Haven that we did, our example here, we did a film saving series called Saving Our Cities, Saving the Land, about kind of environmental sustainability and sort of the public transportation. It had a lot of dimensions. We always wove history into these things. Oh, and here you are. Well, you've got a perfect tableau. I had no idea when we were corresponding. Certainly been to Sudbury before, but I didn't know. Hadn't seen the museum, and I wasn't aware of the collections. And your best artifact is this location. You've got so much, and I'm sure there's lots of stuff, and that if you put the effort into it, you will have tremendous achievement. Well, we're still trying to find the love. I'm going to wrap up here. Do we turn our backs on 3 centuries of national pride and civic culture? Or do we rekindle civic feeling, socially cooperative behavior, community spirit, and reverence for the American idea? Young people are yearning to be part of something important. We must all occupy somewhere. Like it or not, celebrities, politicians, and captains of industry have influence. We need more of them to lead and to break the paralyzing divisionalism of e pluribus and tap inspirational rhetoric that rekindles unum. It's not about making people think the same, look the same, and that revolution will start small, and it will start in locales just like this. This is why, as you grapple with what it means to preserve and present your story, and as you engage young, old, resident visitors, and discover your special narrative. And I was thrilled about this. I was getting my oil changed. I don't usually look at People magazine too much, but I don't. There I was, and they had an article about Taylor Swift, and I almost fell off my chair. She was saying I was in New York, and I was so bummed because I wanted to go to the New York Historical Society, and the day I was there, it was closed. I love American history. You go, girl. We need more like you. I want you. You got 100 million now. I want you to have 500 million. And actually, last year, she's 22, 3 years old. She gave $3 million to the country Music Hall of Fame in her native Nashville, Tennessee. That's somebody who's already on a philanthropic tack and who gets it and cares. The America I remember as a little cold warrior in the early 60s was an America laden with signs and symbols of national reverence. For me, it was inspirational and aspirational. For those who felt like outsiders, whose religion, ethnicity, race, sexual orientation, or gender felt disenfranchised or alienated, they were right. And God bless America, we are dealing with it, or have dealt with it, imperfectly and incompletely, but to be sure, but more swiftly and effectively than any nation on earth ever has or ever could. Adaptability and the capacity for change is part of the genius of the American idea. The first step in understanding any problem is realizing there is one. Rekindling awe, aspiration, and civic attachment requires that we make our history matter again, in schools, in our communities, and in our hearts. It's the best way to put the unum back in e pluribus, and it involves relocalizing our economy and culture, remoralizing the marketplace so everything isn't reduced to dollars, and making sure that the ladder of hope and opportunity reaches the poor, the immigrant, and the struggling. This is and needs to be our new space race, a cultural Manhattan project that rekindles the American spirit. Our State Humanities Council in Connecticut has a mission statement I want to read to you. It's short. It's a good one. The mission of Connecticut Humanities is to use the power of the humanities to nurture curious minds, sustain cultural literacy, strengthen community ties, and explore common threads among Connecticut's diverse peoples. So what it's acknowledging is that this history thing isn't just the academic piece, it's a community piece, it's multidimensional. The traditional argument for history is that it promotes language skills, critical thinking, research skills, the ability to think and see things in context, and the ability to communicate clearly. There is no line of work or civic duty where those skills are not required. Yes, a knowledge of science, math, and technology are important, but without the ability to think, argue, debate, and communicate, what have we? But it is also valuable in instilling moral courage and civic attachment. We are a country founded on revolutionary ideas with a view of government that is by and for the people, a new invention in the history of mankind. Our future depends on our citizenry continuing to understand these ideas, and that understanding will not come down as a revelation from on high, but in the quality and character of the communities we make, and at the level that matters most, which is local. Being an American is not based on common ancestry, a common religion, or even common culture. It's based on accepting an uncommon set of ideas. And if we don't understand those ideas, we don't value them, we can't protect them. Social scientist Charles Murray calls for a civic great awakening. We should teach history in a way that builds social capital and civic attachment. So please keep this in mind as you embark on your journey to develop your historical society and make the most of your community stories. What you do isn't just important, it is indispensable. And if it's done well, in fact, it will rekindle awe, aspiration, and civic purpose. Thanks so much. The light's gone, yeah. That was
Thank you.
You were my guinea pig. I hadn't done this before. It's too long, a little bit too long, and I'll try to shorten it next time. But if you have any energy left, if there are any questions or comments?
Right, that's exactly what I was wondering. Does anyone have any comments or questions for Bill?
Question. One thing that struck me was when you said that we're finding faults now with American history, and they're kind of, nobody's perfect, but is there some way we can start emphasizing the positive? And have you seen any of that happening?
Of course. Yeah, and it's, in what's that? Well, you could, vote for somebody. Always vote for somebody else. Your term limits, no. But the positive, yes. I think that the beauty of local history is it's the only thing we all agree on. People may have different ideologies and different political orientations, but nobody will say with a straight face they don't care about the place they live. And so I think local history is the way to construct. It's not the only piece, but I would love, my magic wand has two parts. One is to engage this stuff in the schools, make history, no child left behind. That policy marginalized, they don't teach history, civics, or social studies. They don't test it, and so they've de-emphasized the teaching of it. And I joke about it. I say if an enemy combatant was trying to undermine this country from within, they could not have picked a more sophisticated strategy than to undermine civics and teaching of history in this country. It's catastrophic, and it's wrong, and it needs to be fixed. But localizing is one way to do it. And I think, it's still America. You can still speak up. Let the superintendents of your school know that you care. And I was just reading about a group of historical societies that had created an advocacy network where instead of one town making a point, I think, where was this? Was this in? Albany. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, me too. We must be following the same stuff. Yes, it was great. In Greater Albany, they created this network, and they are now advocating this collective action with the state. And community organizing can be about this stuff too. And I think that a lot of times people in the history biz are a little shrinking violets a little too much, and we think, well, we're just doing our little thing, and we don't need. They're going to put $1 billion into this and $100 billion into that, but we don't need anything. We'll just make do. This stuff is important, and I think that the localizing and that advocacy will make a difference. And by the way, I have if anyone does Facebook, there is Our History Matters is a Facebook community that I'm involved in, and that people post stuff that is interesting. Our History Matters on Facebook, and I think you might like that. Any other questions or? Yes?
This really isn't a question.
Oh, good, even better.
Listening to all that you have said today was inspirational for those of us on the trustees of the Sudbury Historical Society, but I also feel all of a sudden very proud of what we do with our school system and getting those kids in the spring to come out and walk the town center. We have an excellent program which you'd be proud of.
I'm sure I would. And that's another piece of this is, God willing, I'm going to finish a book on this at some point. There are thousands of anecdotal stories like this, and nobody's ever surveyed them. I mean, I think one of the neat things about Facebook and social media is that communities, people are able to, it's easier than ever. If somebody's had a breakthrough innovation in Kansas, there's a better chance of learning about it now than ever. It still doesn't mean, I mean, I think that stereotypes about historical societies being sleepy or house museums being monotonous, we need to push back and tell those stories. And if, to the extent possible, get the media to cover what you do. Sometime if you've got a school group, you've probably done it before, but if you've got a school group and you can get the parents and the teachers to go along, invite a journalist to accompany you for the day and write about what you're doing, because I've been there, and I think you watch these kids, I think, as I joked about at one point, a bad day at Sturbridge Village is, probably you could learn more than in a good week in school. It's something about real things and real stories and the intimacy of it. I mean, I can only speak for myself, but I was the kind of kid who just woke up and was utterly alert on field trips. And I think a lot of people remember those field trips. Yes?
Sudbury has a lot of young families that we would love to reach out to. There's a lot of families that come for a few years and leave. And
that move into town and then leave?
And so we would love to figure out how to reach them.
Wow.
But there's a lot of people that just don't stay for years.
Is that, does Sudbury specialize in that? Or is it, I mean, why is Sudbury, is there more mobility and transience in Sudbury than in Concord or in other towns?
I think it's the schools of the tax.
Okay, yeah.
I know a lot of families move out when their kids graduate high school, so because the taxes are so high.
Yeah, no, that doesn't surprise me. I worked in New Haven, and that was the worst because it's a college town. There's not much else economically, and college towns are the most transient in the world. I mean, they really, because the students are all coming and then going, and the faculty that don't get tenure come and then go, and there's just a swirl. It's probably the professional community in New Haven probably turns over, 50% of them are new every 5 years. And that is harder. And I honestly, that is, actually it's why this local stuff matters more than ever, because I just don't even know what to make of people that don't have any roots. I mean, if you were an adult and you had a career that involved 7 or 8 locations over the course of 30 years, you might never literally psychologically even unpack. And I know it's a phenomenon of our times, but I don't know what one can do except that good adult public programming can at least introduce, and children's programs. I mean, there are lots of things creatively. My wife here, Christine, was the founding director, actually, of the education department at the Connecticut Historical Society, and she's done amazing things. She worked at the Margaret Woodbury Strong Museum in Rochester, New York, and actually wrote her bachelor's thesis at Brown on museum education in the 70s when this was just beginning to really take off. So she has more experience with this than me, but there are networks. The New England Museum Association has great conferences. There are ways of learning from the success stories of others and mimicking things that work.
Some years ago, a teacher or a group of teachers wrote the beginning of Sudbury, Peter Noyes, and I tried to find out if anybody still had the document that they put together to do the play.
Oh.
And nobody I talked to knew where, and I've wondered if others have tried to find it.
When was this?
Oh, 60s or 70s.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah, and it was done. The kids put on a play, and it was excellent. And it seemed like something that should have been preserved and done periodically. But where the document went that could have done it.
Well, and I didn't get into that much, but if you go to Colonial Williamsburg today, I would almost say that it is more than anything a stage set for theatrical dramatizations. That they do a lot of great stuff. They've still got a lot of great collections. But the thing that Williamsburg is doing now that is really dynamic is theatrical, and they're these scripted dramas. And you know, what a wonderful project that would be for a class or a school to do the research and to develop the script and the characters. And I know Christine has done. They've in the graveyard. What do you call? What if you, the ghost walks? But they're not. But you have memory walks where they have a community theater group where people research, and she probably helps with the scripts. But they script these characters, and people come out, and then you're in the graveyard, and you're at somebody's gravesite, but you're meeting them. And they have their story to tell, and they're history based, and you know, that's cool. You've done that, yeah? Did it work? I mean, it was fun. Yeah, sure, great. All right, well.
Bill, we have to invite you this spring to come with is it third or fourth grades?
Yeah,
third.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Because you would, all the things you're saying now is what
we're doing
with our kids in the school, and we have voices from the grave.
Okay. Well, all right, I think so. There's refreshments, is that the idea?
Yes. Thank you very much, Bill. That was wonderful.